Hello, my name is Gareth Russell, and as part of a plan to offer people several very rough around the edges videos about different aspects of history in the hope of distracting you or entertaining you throughout lockdown and social distancing, I am offering a mental tour of the public rooms on arguably the most famous disaster in history, certainly the most famous at sea, the British luxury liner Titanic, which was launched in Belfast in 1911 and sailed from Southampton, England on her first commercial crossing on April 10th, 1912. There was another call at the French port of Cherbourg later that day to collect more passengers, and then an overnight crossing of what was later named the Celtic Sea, bringing her to the southeastern Irish harbour of Queenstown, which a decade later, after Irish independence, would be redubbed Cove. After a short stay for meal to let some passengers off and load more, the Titanic set out into the Atlantic, bound for her final port of call, New York. Just a quick note on the images used in this sort of slideshow come video. I have tried where possible to use images that I have the rights to or that are in the public domain. Sometimes we all know things are listed as PD when they're not. This is not a monetized or commercial venture, obviously. It's sort of in the free to use and in the hope of distracting you. But I really think it's important to attribute where possible. So if you own the rights to an image that's used here, which I have thought was PD or in my collection, please drop me a message. I'll make sure to attribute below, contact you probably, remunerate you possibly, or edit where I can. I hope that's not necessary, but you never know. It can be a bit of a wild west on the internet, I think. And I really don't want to pinch from someone who's gone to the commendable trouble of creating a collection that's been leaked online. I'll put a list. I did this with the Anne Boleyn video as well. I put a couple of books I referenced in this if you wanted further reading. I'll do that at the bottom here. Just of books if you're really interested in the layout of the Titanic. But can I also say there are a few little images used from a computer game that I think entered like distribution in 96 or something, or 97, called Titanic Adventure Out of Time, which really did pretty accurately recreate the public rooms that it allowed in gameplay. So I've used those for a bit of variety. But also, I'm not using their images because they're theirs. But I would really strongly encourage you to find them on YouTube or Facebook. There is a young team of gentlemen who are developing a computer game called Titanic Honor and Glory. The American spelling of honor, I think, just in case you're typing it in. But the detail they go into in recreating the rooms in the Titanic, it's just utterly extraordinary. They are truly, I would say, just giants of historical reconstruction. It's extraordinary, and they also did a very moving sort of second by second computer reanimation of the sinking. But I think their recreation, particularly of the first class restaurant and the second class dining saloon, are just mind blowing. But anyway, that's sort of the preamble. Secondly, I would say the Titanic was the second in a three-part design of very similar ocean liners, which we would refer to as sister ships. The eldest of which was the Olympic, that entered service the year before and went on to serve very successfully until she was retired in 1935. There were actually dozens, if not hundreds, of tiny but significant differences between the Olympic and the Titanic, but some of their public rooms look very similar. So where photographs of the transient Titanic have not been available, I have used Old Reliable, as the Olympic was called, in the hope that something is better than nothing and that you'll be good sports about it. But where I have used them, the rooms were very, very similar. This video is going out on April 12th, 2020, so the height of lockdown during the global sorrow of the coronavirus. 108 years on from Friday, April 12th, 1912, which was, for the Titanic's passengers, their voyage's first full day at sea without a port of call. So, imagining that you are a passenger holding a ticket to travel in third class, what would this Friday be like at sea? Well, Firstly, you are probably heading as an immigrant to start a new life in the United States, but you probably come from a background that's financially stable enough that if you had chosen to travel on another, less glamorous, less modern ship, you might have been comfortable enough to buy a second class ticket. Third class on the Titanic and her older sister, the Olympic, is considered so superior that their operators, the White Star Line, charge as much as other companies often do for second class tickets. That's not to say that you won't notice people on board who are in difficult financial straits. You might see the fragile figure of Rhoda Abbott, who's travelling with her two teenage sons, Rossmore and Eugene. Rhoda has previously fled a physically abusive marriage, and she is travelling with her two sons on the Titanic through the generosity of the Salvation Army, her church congregation, which she is a member of. They have paid for tickets to bring her and her family over on the Titanic. Now, you might be referred to as steerage passengers. It's a common turn of phrase in describing third class, but it's actually misleading here. Steerage implies communal dormitories, which the Titanic definitely does not offer. But if there's interest in what bedrooms or cabins were like on the Titanic, comment below and I'll try to make a video on that next week. I'm sort of going to stick more to the public rooms. But if you would like to hear what the cabin experiences were like, leave a comment. Food is plentiful and of very high quality in the third class dining saloon, or technically saloons, located amidship, the middle of the ship, surprisingly enough, on F deck. All the decks, apart from the boat deck, which is at the top, are listed alphabetically. So the ship's watertight bulkheads, which are a celebrated safety feature, rise through F deck to E deck above, with the effect that the bulkhead kind of almost divides the dining saloon to the extent that it feels like two rooms. Anyway, you walk in for breakfast and you're found a spot at one of the long tables which sit about 14 passengers. And you'll have the option to have some oatmeal porridge made with milk. There's also herrings, a very divisive topic, I know, fish for breakfast. Some people love it, some people hate it. There'll also be the options of breakfast potatoes, which will set you up nicely for life in America. Breakfast potatoes are much more of an American, I think, tradition. There's potato bread in Ireland, but I could be wrong on this. Again, comment, but I'm nearly certain, like, breakfast potatoes I would have seen, like, when I'm in America, but I wouldn't see them in Northern Ireland or the UK, the rest of the UK. I tripped over Northern Ireland, the UK, GB. Please don't take offence. There is also going to be ling fish and egg sauce, which I think sounds truly horrific, as well as options for tea and coffee with the usual sugar and milk. The White Star Line is very careful to sort of guard people female travellers against what we would now call sexual harassment. And so they keep the cabins for single men almost at the other end of the ship to women or families travelling. And this kind of applies with that watertight bulkhead division that I mentioned. So what they tend to do is, in one half they will sit the single male passengers, and a lot of immigrants are single men going out to kind of make their fortune and bring their families over later, or they're not tied to their homeland so they can emigrate. And then families and single females will eat elsewhere. Sorry, in the second half of the room. There's statistically quite a high number of third class passengers tend to be single males, which is why there is this facility to not segregate, but certainly to provide different facilities. When you're done with breakfast, you can head up to the third class's leisure outdoor space, known by the old nautical turn of phrase, the poop deck, at the stern, which you can see in this photograph of the Titanic when it was docked at Queenstown the day before. Friday is a calm, clear, sorry, it should be clear, it's where all the people are sort of gathered, and you can see the Titanic's name Question I get asked often, actually, now that I see it, is why does the Titanic's name come above the word Liverpool when it was built in Belfast and it set sail from Southampton, so two different British cities. Liverpool is the Titanic's port of registry. It's the headquarters at this time of her owners, the White Star Line. So she's registered out of Liverpool, even though she never went there. Anyway, Friday is a calm, clear, fresh day, so the breeze you'll feel will be bracing but not uncomfortable. I love a sea breeze. Other people might find it uncomfortable at any time. If you are a woman or a child, there's a chance that you can pop back down below to the dining saloon at 11 a.m. when something like a chicken broth or a beef tea, a kind of broth which I don't think we would, it's not very popular today. The saloon will also offer any passengers sort of tea or coffee throughout the day. You'll be back there anyway at about 1 o'clock for your big meal of the day. Sample menus for which indicate kicking off with some soup, then options for beef or mutton, which you can jolly up with carrots, turnips, green peas. There might be the option of pork and, mother of God, again, lingfish with sauce. Bread and potatoes will be available too, and you can wrap things up nicely with something like rice pudding or plum pudding or stewed apples or stewed prunes. All of this is included in your ticket price. Just like there were jams and butter on table for breakfast, there's now some fresh fruit for the main meal. There are two sittings for the main meal, one at noon and one at 1. The reason for that being is that the dining room isn't big enough to sit all of the third class passengers at one sitting. At full capacity, the Titanic has room for about 1,100 in third class, but this is a spring crossing and they tend to be a little less popular. So it's not too crowded in third class. There are just over 700 travelling with you this week. If you're a man and the splendid view of the ocean is starting to bore you, you can spend some time in what I would argue is probably the most utilitarianly decorated public room on the Titanic, with the ironic exception of the, let's call it, Spartan first class swimming pool. The third class smoking room is like the smoking rooms for the other two classes, intended for male passengers only. A lot of women do smoke, but it is considered fairly inappropriate to see it done in public. If any of you have seen or visited the Titanic's surviving ferry, the Nomadic, which is now a permanently docked tourist attraction in Belfast, I think the quarters there are very similar to how the third class smoking room was decorated, which is why I've included it. Next door to the smoking room, the genders and the age groups can mix in one of the liner's most famous rooms, the general room, the main social space for third class, which is famous because it's where the fictional Jack and Rose go to party in James Cameron's 1997 movie Titanic. And it also features prominently with a fairly accurate set reconstruction in the 1958 adaptation of A Night to Remember. Both scenes capture the music and impromptu fun that could be had by the passengers socialising together there. You will have to make your own fun because, unlike 21st century cruise ships, there's no real concept of an organised entertainment space in a point-to-point Edwardian liner. This is still a mode of transport as much as anything else. The evening meal is pretty rudimentary. It's smaller than the main meal at what we would call lunchtime. There'll be some tinned corned meats with tea, coffee, fresh bread, pickles, or an oatmeal gruel. As before, however, the dining saloon's table will be set for you with white linen tablecloths. Your uniformed steward will look after you. He's under strict instructions from the company to treat all third-class passengers with utmost respect. And as before, you'll notice your printed menu can double as a postcard. So why not write down just how impressed you are with the comfort on the Titanic, the professionalism of its stewards, and the high quality of the mountains of food you're enjoying. You can deliver this postcard to be posted when the ship reaches New York, and the White Star Line has been clever providing you with the postcard because, let's face it, it's essentially a form of advertising from them for you to send to relatives or friends who might be tempted to join your new life in the USA, and why not enjoy similar levels of comfort on a White Star ship? So, through this advertising, they could become, like you, one of the 23,000 immigrants who will cross to America this year on a White Star ship. I've spent years of my life, obviously the last few years, studying the Titanic, and I first heard stories about her from my great-grandparents, Thomas and Elizabeth, to whom my book is dedicated. They saw it being built and leaving Belfast. But sometimes, no matter how familiar I become with her, sometimes when I see photographs like this again, I just think, my goodness, she was a beautiful thing. Oh. Right. So, maybe you're in the smallest and most underrepresented of the Titanic's classes. Maybe you're a second-class passenger. So you wake up in your cozy cabin to spend Friday milling around in the oak and walnut augmented comfort of second class. It's sailing at about half of its usual capacity of around 560. I go into trying to judge the passenger capacities in chapter 6 of my book, rather than specifics here, because this is a bit more lighthearted, and no one wants to hear about that midway through a video. But yeah, a lot of people are very surprised as to why the Titanic wasn't at full capacity, and I talk about that in the book. Maybe you're tired this morning and you use the lift, or the elevator as it's known in the States, to get up to the second class dining saloon on D-deck. The lift attendant opens the doors from only the second ever elevator provided at sea for second class passengers. The first was on the Olympic. The lift attendant this morning might be 17-year-old Reginald Pacey or one of his colleagues who ferry you on your way to breakfast. The dining saloon, with its 2-hour window for breakfast, offers you a seat at long dining tables with swivel chairs that are bolted to the floor in case of choppy seas. Again, it's beautifully set and the service is impeccable. If you're a gentleman, you might take the elevator up 2 decks to spend part of your day in the smoking room, although that's really more for the afternoon when it's socially acceptable to play a few hands of cards. You might go up on deck to take air in the promenade spaces set aside for second class. You might even have reserved a deck chair and a rug where you can enjoy hot drinks as the Atlantic sky sails by you as the breeze cuts in off the ocean far below. If you want a book to read while you're relaxing on deck, you can go down to C deck, to the library. Despite its name, it's really the second class's equivalent of a lounge, but it has a healthy collection of books. I think it's a fine room, actually. In a recent interview, I said it was probably my favourite room on the Titanic, along with one in first class, the restaurant. It's certainly become a passenger favourite. Maybe you'll spot the tall, slender form of voracious reader Lawrence Beasley, a Cambridge-educated science teacher en route to holiday in America. Once you've picked out a book, you might head up to the staircase when the ship's band are performing a concert of live music for second-class passengers. You're probably familiar with the 8 musicians, certainly the sight of them, since the Titanic's band travel in second-class cabins and they eat with you in your dining saloon. Maybe you caught their jaunty ragtime tunes or popular waltzes when they played in the vestibule at 10 a.m. this morning, or just after time for afternoon tea later in the day. Like you, the musicians will have weighed up between options like pea soup, spaghetti, corned beef, vegetable dumplings, or roast mutton, setting their lunchtime plates off with potatoes or side cuts. At dinner, you and they will have options like the ever-reliable roast turkey, baked haddock, curried chicken with rice, or lamb, very much in season in spring, which you can sleep off in your cabin. It's been a slightly more glamorous day, potentially, if you're dozing off in your first class stateroom or suite. Maybe you're exhausted after a lesson earlier in the day with the ship's professional racquetball instructor, or you're worn out after a long swim. Down on F deck, the ship boasts a fitness suite, for want of a more contemporary catch-all description, which includes a swimming pool, an electric bath, a squash court, and a fantastic Turkish bath. Fantastic in every sense of the word, because it's very much a European imagining of what the lavish private quarters might be like for the Ottoman Sultan. It's a bit odd to some why these fitness based rooms or wellness centres, however a 21st century audience might dub them, are located so far away from the first class gymnasium. In fact, they're as far away from each other as it's possible to be in first class. The gymnasium is off from the boat deck where the lifeboats are kept, but use of the F deck facilities is not included in the price of a first class ticket. You have to pay extra for them, while use of the gym is covered in the ticket, so it makes sense to keep them separate. Between these bookends of self-care lies the world of first class. If you didn't tire yourself out with exercise, even gently by walking through the enclosed promenade spaces or out on the open decks, dinner in the first class dining saloon will likely have left you as full as a tick as some of the southern first class passengers, like historian Colonel Archibald Gracie IV, might put it. This evening, the dining saloon, one of the largest rooms afloat, its decoration is inspired partly by Queen Elizabeth I's childhood home. Stately homes in the times of her successor, King James I, and a country house that belongs to the Dukes of Rutland, has offered you a dinner that began with hors d'oeuvre and oysters. Then there was your soup course, at which the choice was between a consommé Sévigné or a crème condé. Halibut for your fish course was followed by a choice between duck and lobster. For anyone tempted by a vegetarian option of that course, there was mushroom vol au vent, but for the next course, vegetables will only be appearing as the sideshow next to side of sirloin, rooster with ox tongue, or mutton. Then there's a salad course, which I assume must have been purely a decorative feature, more of a palate cleanser really at this stage, with ice cream, a pineapple royale, or a friandaise cake for dessert. After that, you could enjoy a social cocktail or two, again in Colonel Gracie's inimitable turn of phrase, next door in the reception room. The reception room proved so popular on the Olympic that it's been expanded on the Titanic, and it's here that the band play their post-dinner concerts. You might spare a thought to pity the poor cellist who has to schlep the beast between the multiple concerts offered in first and second class throughout the day. Of all the rooms, the Titanic's reception room is the one which is referred to by the most bewildering number of incorrect names by passengers. A gossip column will later refer to it as the ballroom. Its Steinway piano got it called the music room, while the decorations earn it the sobriquet the palm room. Either way, it's here as after-dinner mints, teas, coffees, and social cocktails are brought to tables by attentive stewards that you might spy some of the ship's celebrated passengers. The White Star Line is a beloved and trusty carrier of the wealthy and the well-connected. There's room at full capacity for over 900, although there's just over 300 first-class ticket holders this week on the Titanic. You might spy the immaculately styled moustache of Colonel J.J. Astor, the landlord of New York, one of the richest men in the world, returning from his honeymoon with his teenage pregnant new wife Madeline. Famous authors Helen Churchill Candy and Jacques Futrelle are on board, as is Wimbledon and Davis Cup tennis star Carl Baer, and celebrated fashion designer Lucy, Lady Duff Gordon, recipient of rave reviews in Vogue, and whose clients include the Queen of Spain and the Crown Princess of Sweden. Speaking of Spain, the Prime Minister's nephew is travelling on his honeymoon. If you're familiar with the emerging world of media celebrity, you might recognise the radiant form of Dorothy Gibson, familiar from her covers of Cosmopolitan magazine last summer. She's travelling back to her native US to film yet another silent movie, the latest in a long line of hits for Dorothy. The middle aged lady she's travelling with is her mother, Pauline. We might politely refer to Pauline Gibson as redoubtable. While you're enjoying your drinks and the music and a little spot of staring, you may spy some fellow passengers descending after dinner to join you in their finery from another deck. Where have they been? Well, the lashings of food you received in the dining saloon are included in your fare, but some passengers don't want the limited options and mammoth set number of courses. They'd rather dine a la carte, to which end the White Star Line installed a restaurant 2 decks above on B deck. Here you order off a menu and you pay for the meal as we would on any restaurant on land. The first ships to offer this were rival passenger liners operated by the German companies, but the White Star Line is never slow to spot a trend. The test run restaurant on the Olympic again proved so popular that the company has expanded this room for the Titanic. A fun fact, the restaurant on the Olympic had such delicious food served in the walnut and gilt room that was decorated in the style of high society at the time of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, that it becomes the favourite restaurant on land or sea for movie star Charlie Chaplin. But we're getting ahead of ourselves by about a decade. Next door to the restaurant, there is a room which didn't even exist on the Olympic, the Café Parisien. It too is borrowing a trend from the German liners, albeit on the German ships they call these rooms winter gardens or Vienna cafes, but if you change the ambiance to that of a sidewalk coffee house in Paris, no one will notice. B deck is also where the most expensive suites in first class are located, so it's above on A deck where the majority of the public rooms are. Certainly, it's where the social spaces with a purpose are, apart from the reception room, obviously. Gazing over the promenade deck and also out to stern are the 2 veranda cafes. You can take refreshments here in the ambiance of a conservatory by the sea. If you're a mother travelling with children, you might prefer to take them to the veranda which doesn't allow smoking. For men, there is the ship's magnificent first class smoking room, with its stained glass windows, mahogany, gold details, and a working fireplace, which is all designed to rival the best gentlemen's club on land. Just be careful about the professional card sharps, gamblers who book passage on luxury liners to cleverly fleece the wealthy clientele at cards. If the crew recognise one, they'll discreetly tip off the patrons to avoid him. For ladies, there is the gorgeous reading and writing room. You can enter through the mahogany doors. The sound of your footsteps will be cushioned by the thick, rose-coloured carpets. You might pick up a magazine, you might read a book, you might perch yourself beneath the chandeliers at a desk to write a letter home. It can be posted here, for want of a better word, and it will be sent by the staff, who will sort it as well when the ship reaches New York. Nearby, there is the ship's lounge, described by an admiring industry expert as one of the finest rooms ever put to sea. In my book, The Ship of Dreams, I think some people thought I was a little harsh on the lounge, so I'll read the relevant sentences here. I think it was a beautiful room, but I don't think it was particularly well thought out. And actually, quite interestingly, Mark Chirnside, who has written, a fantastic account of the career of the Olympic, does go into quite a lot of detail about how often they try to sort of reinvent the purpose of the lounge in the 1920s because whatever it was just wasn't working. The Titanic's underused lounge, which had been decorated as an homage to Versailles, was unfortunately sporting a similarly in-keeping feel of an abandoned state apartment. Maybe I was a little mean. No one criticised the appearance of the lounge, described by a trade journal as a magnificent salon. In the centre of the room, a chandelier nestled in an oval cupola. Armchairs, sofas, and settees with green silk-covered cushions were dotted across the green and gold carpet, and there was a small bar that served refreshments. However, its location and its utility had both been poorly thought out. The chief problem affecting the lounge's popularity was that nearly everything it offered to passengers was provided in other rooms on board. Stewards collected letters from its ornamental postbox, carrying them down to the mailroom for sorting, and there were writing desks in the lounge stocked with pens and White Star-headed stationery. But elsewhere on the same deck there was a dedicated writing room, and the men's smoking room, which likewise contained some desks and supplies for letter writing. Tea was served every afternoon in the lounge, just as it was in the ship's two cafes, both of which had arguably better views of the passing ocean. And while the lounge stayed open late for after-dinner drinks, so did the reception room, which had the added benefits of playing host to the evening concerts and of being directly adjacent to the dining saloon, rather than 3 decks above. As the day draws to a close, you curl up in bed, your electric heater humming as the temperature outside the great ship is starting to perceptibly drop. The ship speeds on through the night, and you have no reason to believe that you will not spend the next 4 or 5 nights ensconced and safe until this ship, the largest in the world, which Colonel Gracie compared to a summer palace by the seashore, deposits you safely in New York.